It's grinding time, summoners, and welcome back to another Pro Guides video. And for the last ranked patch this season, I want to start by wishing you all the best of luck in these coming weeks. My name is Nathan Ng, and I'll be your host for our patch rundown, where I'll not only cover all the balance changes in this patch, but also provide you with a tier list for all 5 roles. I'm not trying to waste your time here, so let's go ahead and get into this crucial patch. Make sure you hit that sub button, and let's start the video. In regards to skins, there are a bunch of reward skins coming up. More details are to come about Arcane Jace and Vi, but know that they'll be available. The big one that most of you have probably set your eyes on is Victorious Blitzcrank. This solo queue titan will be your prize for placing gold or higher in Season 11. If you're not quite there yet, this might still be one of the best chances that you have to talk to one of our coaches over at ProGuides.com. They've helped hundreds of players hit gold in the last month, and they can absolutely help you too. With skins covered, let's go ahead and talk about balance. Gourd Drinker received a huge nerf on patch 11.21. With the changes to Conqueror alongside it, we saw a drastic shift in the meta. However, Riot is going to be going back and making some small adjustments to the item so that champions who do rely on it have some more strength to fight back. This patch, its health as well as Omnivamp have increased slightly. Expect the top lane meta to slightly inch back towards where it was previously, but probably not quite. Speaking of the top lane, let's go ahead and talk about some more champion changes. The first is Renekton. He's been struggling since the huge nerfs that he previously received. To throw in some more misery into the mix, Conqueror and Gourd Drinker were both nerfed, leaving Nasus' brother on the opposite side of the world from him. I mention him because Nasus is pretty crazy right now, but I'll expand on that more later. More about the Suffering Gator first. This patch, he's been buffed with a revert to the previous nerf to his empowered stun. Renekton mains can finally breathe a sigh of relief. This change was much more crippling than meets the eye. He's gaining a sizable amount of kill pressure back with this change, but it's unlikely that he'll be able to be back in the meta. We'll leave Renekton in the C tier in spite of this buff. Second, Riven was also buffed. Conqueror and Gourd Drinker granted plenty of extra AD, which was crucial to Riven's teamfighting and laning. AD converts into bigger shields for her, so aside from the clear loss of damage, she also found herself a little bit squishier. To help her out, her stun's damage was increased by 10 and her E shield ratio was buffed. Although the damage buff is quite small, the change to her shield isn't. With these changes, she'll be moving back up to the A tier after seeing her plunge down from the S to B tier in our last update. With the champion changes covered, there are still plenty of couple other points I want to touch up on the top lane. Have you seen Teemo recently? Probably not, because you're blinded all the time. That guy is cracked and I hate it. Universally, Teemo is a powerful pick because he's now an even more impressive lane bully who provides solid impact in late game teamfights. In our last update, we mentioned Nasus, who was also a strong contender for that 4th spot if we had one. Especially in low elo, you cannot sleep on Nasus, who is thriving from the reduced damage across the board. Camille and Tahm Kench are powerful grasp users who also benefit from the recent system nerfs. In spite of a small compensation buff to Conqueror, these two picks come out on top as the strongest brawlers at the moment. Their trading patterns are difficult for practically every single top laner to deal with. Tom's all-in potential is disgustingly powerful, while Camille's hit and run playstyle is outright annoying to deal with since she scales and eventually one-shots anything that she touches. In the top lane, our OP picks are Camille, Tahm Kench, and Teemo, followed up by Irelia, Mordekaiser, Nasus, Jax, Malphite, Shen, Mundo, Set, Singed, Quinn, Aatrox, Poppy, Darius, and Fiora. Next up is the jungle. The jungle starts with 2 nerfs to previously overpowered picks. Graves was once broken. Feels like it happens all the time at some point in every season, and Riot nerfs his E's armor proved to be too small. This time, size really does matter. They're giving him a real nerf by hitting his firepower. Graves' passive crit damage bonus was reduced from 30% to 20%. His late game damage output has gone down significantly. For the early game, however, Graves remains just as strong as before. His presence in solo queue is a combination of his powerful early skirmishing as well as scaling, so our analysts believe that he's definitely going down to the S tier at worst. Aside from this shift in the jungle tier list, we also moved Graves down a tier in both solo lanes. Kha'zix is also a victim of a huge nerf. His Q's AD ratio was reduced. This applies to both his normal cast as well as an isolated version. This is a huge reduction in damage, but it's needed after what transpired in the recent patch. With Conqueror users nerfed, Kha'zix has been terrorizing the jungle as he easily utilizes Electrocute as a replacement. The other issue is how hard he snowballs. It only really takes one takedown. Every 350 gold leads to a longsword, which means he's always gaining some power. Kha'zix is down to the S tier this patch. Moving on to a buff, we have Kayn. It was unexpected, but he took a massive hit from the nerfs that were completely intended for top laners. Kayn's red form win rate has shot down significantly, and as a result, he's up for some buffs next patch. To assist him, his Q's AD ratio as well as his ultimate max HP ratio received some big buffs this patch, so don't sleep on him. We'll leave Kayn in the S tier. Before moving forward, let me ask you our question of the day. What have you improved the most on in this season? For me, I think my macro play has improved a lot. Ever since I worked at ProGuides, I mean, what are the odds, you know? Anyway, By watching some more competitive League as well, I've developed my decision making and seen the results in game. Let me know your answers in the comments down below. Now we have those OP junglers that we need to talk about. The first is Elise. Remember that Conqueror is still weaker than before. In spite of a small buff to Gore Drinker, AP junglers are in a great spot right now as a result of the harsh nerfs targeting mostly AD champions. Elise is typically an exceptional jungler when she's reasonably capable to take them on in a 1v1 situation. Aside from her range advantage, Elise has plenty of tools to help her successfully gank enemy laners and apply ridiculous amounts of pressure. The other pick that's on the rise is none other than Evelynn. Assassins are great in solo queue. I think Season 11 has established that pretty well. Not only do they give enemies nearly no time to react, but they also snowball really hard and set enemies behind with some repeated gray screen time. Our OP jungle picks are Elise and Evelynn, followed up by Fiddlesticks, Zac, Kindred, Kayn, Nocturne, Xin Zhao, Amumu, Lilia, Echo, Taliyah, Talon, Shaco, Jarvan, Lee Sin, Graves, and Kha'Zix in the S tier. Next is the mid lane. First off, in the mid lane we have a nerf to Qiyana. It feels like this was intended to target jungle Qiyana, but there's no doubt that the nature of these changes hit her in the mid lane as well. First, her base HP was reduced, while her HP per level was increased. She starts seeing increased health by level 5, but it's undoubtedly a big hit to her in the early game. Her Q's base damage as well as AD scaling were reduced, while her E's damage was increased with a slight reduction in AD scaling. A lot of numbers were tweaked, so to summarize what's going on, her early game and jungle clear are weaker, her mid game is slightly stronger, late game slightly weaker, and she's tankier after level 5. It's a tough call, but she's been moved down to the A tier as a result. Akali was also hit by some Conqueror nerfs, so she received some direct buffs this patch to help her out. A lot of Akali mains wanted a different set of changes, but flat damage and an increased AP ratio can't really hurt. Her passive has received a solid buff with its base damage as well as scaling increased. 6 more damage at level 1 is a solid buff to her poke. With her hit and run playstyle, even a small change like this can add up over the course of the laning phase. With the AP ratio increased by 15% as well, this buff does a good job of returning some lost power. It's a big enough buff that we've decided to move her up to the A tier. Our OP picks for the mid lane this patch are Zed, Vex, and Yasuo, followed up by Sylas, Talon, Annie, Diana, Ahri, Yone, LeBlanc, Kassadin, Anivia, Katarina, Fizz, Akshan, and Lux in the S tier. If you're still unfamiliar with Vex, you should know that she's an excellent pick, and also rather easy to utilize. At the very least, the return on how much effort you need to put in to learn her is quite insane. Her ban rate still sits at 39%, and that's for a good reason. So make sure you get in a few games with her if you can in normal games so you can be ready to lock her in when she does make it through the banning phase. That's it for the mid lane, and let's go ahead and go to the bot lane next. The bottom lane meta remains pretty similar to last patch with only a couple of minor balance changes this patch. That being said, 2 underperforming marksmen are receiving buffs this patch to help them succeed in an aggressive game state that emphasizes a powerful early game. First up is Kalista, who should be thriving given how much important the early game and mid game are. Unfortunately, she's fallen behind the rest of the pack and has received a huge buff to her E to compensate. While the ratio was only increased by 10%, remember she can pop multiple spares off a target at once. It's a much bigger buff than it impairs, and taking long extended fights against Kalista is not recommended unless you like losing. This is a solid mid game and late game buff, but I'm certain players will try their best to close out games as fast as possible with a champion like Kalista. Because of this buff, we'll move her up to the B tier. The other champion who's been underperforming is Varus. His story this season has its ups and downs. One patch he's broken, and next he's nerfed to the ground. Hopefully this next buff will bring him into a reasonable power level. After struggling for so many patches, his E has received a 30% increase in its AD ratio. Since his build consists of high attack damage and lethality, it doesn't take long for him to start seeing some noticeable increase in his damage. Even in the very early game, this is a slight damage buff to players who start with or recall early for a Doran's Blade or a Longsword. It's a tough call, but we're leaving him in the C tier in spite of this buff. While it is big, it's unlikely that this buff alone will make a big enough difference to impact his placement. With no other changes, we'll leave the rest of the bottom lane tier list as is. However, I do want to point out Xayah, who's seen a night and day difference since her last buffs. Last patch, her win rate increased by nearly 2%, and like our analysts predicted, she's definitely deserving a higher placement. Just know that you don't need a tunnel vision on getting the Xayah and Rakan duo. Xayah pairs really well with a variety of other supports because of her crowd control, burst damage, and safety with her ultimate. Our OP bot lane picks this patch are Misfortune and Vayne, followed up by Ashe, Ezreal, Jhin, Samara, Ziggs, Lucian, Karthus, and Jinx in the S tier. Misfortune is still broken as she's dodged yet another nerf, so make sure to abuse her this patch as much as possible. Finally, we'll conclude with supports. For supports, we have 2 nerfs to cover beginning with Yuumi. The AP to movement speed ratio as well as the healing have both been reduced this patch. At Worlds, Yuumi holds an inconceivable pick and ban rate, sparing the needs for a nerf. She's been doing really well in solo queue as well, so this nerf is targeted at players of all levels. Because of her safety, Yuumi can reliably provide an incredible amount of utility for her team. Rather than making her easier to pick off, Riot is instead reducing the amount of utility that she can consistently give to her team. With these nerfs, she'll come out slightly less impactful but remains in the S tier. I'd say the bigger nerf is to the movement speed ratio, as it granted her chosen ally an immense amount of maneuverability. Finally, there's also a nerf for support Maokai. Unfortunately, this time around, it's a nerf that also hits top lane Maokai. All Maokai players must suffer as a result of his devastating saplings. With the previous nerf to Imperial Mandate, he's been finding more success as a support, and as an outlier, he was targeted for a nerf this patch. His passive's maximum HP healing as well as his W's base damage were reduced this patch. These nerfs are rather small, and as a result, he's going to be staying in the S tier. However, it should be easier to kill him with a sizable loss of sustain. Like the bottom lane, there aren't any big changes that we expect to see in the support meta this patch. Our 3 OP picks for supports are Blitzcrank, Amumu, and Nami, who all fill a specific niche. Nami is a consistent enchanter who carries with a dominant laning phase and a reliable set of peeling tools. Amumu remains an incredible asset to any team as he brings incredible teamfighting and crowd control, while Blitzcrank has his Q. Yep, that alone is enough. Given all the various nerfs that we've seen to other tank supports over the season, Blitzcrank remains in a great spot. And that's where we have Thresh, Morgana, Maokai, Zyra, Yuumi, Lulu, Sona, Leona, Lux, and Soraka. And that concludes our 11.22 patch rundown. I'll say it again, but I hope you're all prepared for this patch. It's the final stretch of the season. If you guys are interested, check out the description to join our Discord community. I'm rooting for all of you, and I hope you guys are able to accomplish all your ranked goals. Good luck out there, summoners, and as usual, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.